First and foremost, let me express my sincerest gratitude to Buenaventura Alandi National High School for allowing me to share my knowledge about the topic that I'm going to discuss this morning. In addition, I would like to thank your school principal, Ma'am Grace Cabile, Dr. Michael Leonard Lubiano, and the rest of the faculty for initiating this kind of event for our students this month of September as we celebrate the Science Month Club celebration. And with that, let me share my screen and present my topic on the DIY tips becoming a scientist at home. Now that we are under quarantine, we are experiencing a different kind of learning at home, and especially in science, learning is becoming a challenge because of the experiments and the different concepts that we have to learn compared to the traditional way of learning science in schools. But with the topic that I am going to discuss, I do hope that the learners will be able to create their own experiments at home with, of course, the guidance of their parents and their teachers. Right. So for today's agenda, we are going to talk about three main topics. These are number one, democratizing science. Number two is the tips or 10 tips for hands-on science. And finally, 5 tips for success with experiment at home. All right. And what do we mean by democratizing science? So when we say from the word democratic, when students create their DIY or do-it-yourself experiments at home, you are in control of your experiment. All right? Because when you do the experiment on your own, you are building and maintaining or keeping an experiment in control based on what you are doing without the actual guidance of your parent or your science teacher. Oh, and when you democratize science, of course, you have to consider certain parameters or certain boundaries because there are activities, of course, that cannot be simply done alone, right? And with the help of your science teacher and your parents, they would be able to guide you on how to become successful in conducting your experiments at home, right? And because of the trends in science education, there are certain equipment and materials that can already be purchased online or that can be improvised so that you will not need to spend money and to buy this kind of equipment at a higher price, right? So meron na tayo ngayong mga alternatives na tinatawag, no? And what are these DIY technologies? Number one is 3D printing, no? There are available 3D printers in the market, and somehow this could be delivered at your doorstep, no? If you're going to do online shopping, meron tayo mga available na 3D printers that could be manipulated or that could be used to create your own models, to create your own designs, no? And you just have to buy the materials needed to make it work. No? And what's good about 3D printing is its customizability. No? You can create anything, design anything, and the imagination of of the students is the limit of 3D printing. No? And this is very usable whenever you want to create something that you can use in modeling or in visualizing certain concepts in science. So, one disadvantage of 3D printing is, yun lang, you have to spend some cash or some money in order to buy it and to maintain the materials that are needed to print. No? And another are DIY reagents. No? we know that in chemistry, we need certain chemicals in order for us to make a chemical reaction or a chemical experiment. But with the technology that we have now, we can order reagents or chemicals that can be used at home, and these are safe for use even without the guidance of your teacher. Just make sure that when you do these experiments that involves reagents, you are with the supervision of an adult, maybe your parent or guardian or your teacher if possible through virtual conferencing, you know. And finally, we have improvisation. Oh. When we improvise, we substitute or we think of alternative equipment that can be used at home. For example, if you do not have test tubes or beakers at home, you can use the glass containers of jams and other bottles that are already used up in your house. You just have to wash them thoroughly to remove any dirt or any impurity in the container before using them, right? And other than that, you can also ask your teacher what could be the alternative equipment that you can use so that you will be able to perform each experiment successfully even without the the required equipment, right? And through this, you can also develop critical thinking because you would be able to think what could be an equivalent of this equipment in our house. Oh? And of course, you really have to consult with your science teacher. No? So, wag mahihiyang magtanong sa inyong science teacher when you want to improvise something because they would be able to help you with that. Right. Now let's proceed to the tips on hands-on science. Right. Since everyone is at home and all of our educational activities are done at home, let's look at these tips. Right. Number one is to use both scientific demonstrations and experiments. Now, when we say use both scientific demonstration and experiments, you can refer to existing videos or to existing experiments that have already been done by other students before you conduct your own. No? Looking at these videos would be a good help for you to look into the final output and to observe what could be the proper way of handling certain chemicals or equipment before your actual experimentation. Oh. Another is to record your experiments, right? This could be in the form of data gathering. You write down the results of your experiments, take note, no, note taking of all the steps that you did, the outcomes and the results, right? But if you have your mobile phone, you can record it virtually using your video phone, no? You can use your camera because when you record your experiment using video, you would be able to come back, rewind, review the experiment so that if in case there are something wrong happening in your experiment, you would be able to recap and understand which parts of the experiment can be improved or enhanced so that when you do it again, it will have better results. Right? For number three, know what to do when you don't have experiment supplies. Right? This is what I have mentioned earlier. No, we can improvise. Right? So think of possible alternative supplies that can be used at home if in case it will require you to use certain equipment that is only available from the lab. No? And because you cannot go to school and borrow equipment, you have to think of alternative materials. No? And if you can think of alternative materials, don't hesitate to ask your teacher about it, no? On how you can simplify the experiment. No? Because not all materials, admit it or not, can be found at our house, right? Right. Next, tips for hands-on experiment number 4 is to know what to do when your experiments fail. Right? Remember, we are not perfect, right? So expect that there are instances wherein we followed the procedure, but somehow the results that we are expecting did not happen. Oh, when these situations happen, do not feel down, do not be discouraged, no? Because somehow along the way there might have been some errors or some miscalculations or something might have been done differently. That's why the results that we are expecting was not achieved. So this is the reason why, again, we go back to the previous tip, record your experiment so that you can review and look back at the steps that you have taken. So in the future, you will be able to correct them. Oh. Next, make your own experiment kit or purchase a pre-made one, right? I have mentioned this earlier. Again, DIY reagents. There are chemicals which are research grade and there are chemicals that are safe for students to use or handle which you can order online. No, just make sure that you really read the fine print of the reagent or the equipment before you purchase them, and make sure that this equipment or materials are the right one for your experiment. No? Don't just add to cart the equipment or the reagents that you would not be using because you would be wasting resources. No? All right. Number 6 is learn about nature study. No? Since we are at home and Tayaba City is still mostly agricultural in nature, learn about nature. No? Because when we look outside and we observe what is happening in the environment, there are a lot of experiments, simple experiments that we can do so that we can understand science concepts better. No? There are a lot of natural phenomena that we can observe so that through experimentation, we can verify if this phenomena or these concepts are true or not. Oh, so that's what's good about nature study. No? Being able to observe what's happening around us. All right. Number 7 is to pause and take 15 minutes at the window. What do we mean by this? So whenever you are doing certain experiments at home and you feel that the task is too heavy for you, you can pause for a while, look outside your window to release some stress, right? We know that somehow science concepts can sometimes be difficult to understand, especially now that you are doing things on your own. Oh, because you are doing things without the direct supervision of your science teacher, or sometimes without the presence of your parents or guardians, these tasks can be very stressful. And what we can do is pause for a while and just gather ourselves. And then we continue. Another is observe, observe, observe. No? Observing is a skill that we have to master. No? When we observe, we take note also of what is happening. For example, if you're conducting an experiment about photosynthesis, so you have to take note what is happening to the leaves. No? What you write in detail what you are seeing. So when we are observing, we are using our senses. No, it could be the color. You observe the color of the leaves. It could be you feel the temperature. No, if you do not have the thermometer at home, you can use your sense of touch to feel. But be careful when you touch things, especially when you know that it's very hot, right? And you can use your sense of smell and other senses of your body so that you can really observe in detail and get the right data that you would like to get. Right? Next, number 9 is to study the scientific method. Right? The scientific method is a very good way in order for you to verify your hypothesis and to address the bubble thoughts in your mind whenever you conduct an experiment. Oh, the scientific method is a foolproof way so that you can have a systematic way of conducting an experiment. No? So that you avoid skipping certain steps. No? And in the long run, prevent failed experiments. Right? So make sure that you know and understand the scientific method. Number 10 is to learn about the different types of experiment variables. So always check beforehand when you read your procedure. Identify first which are the constant variable that you need to consider, which variables will be manipulated or changed in your experiment, and what would be the dependent and independent variables. No? Because these variables will be the factors that you need to consider in order to have the right results. Right? Identifying the variables in your experiment would help you understand its effect to other variables. And of course, to the concept that you are observing. Right? So, this is very essential in any experiment. No? And if you are still confused with the variables that you are uh, looking into, you might also consider watching other experiments with the same procedure so that you can have an idea. No? Mas maganda na meron tayong pattern. No? Hindi pwedeng basta na lang tayo nag-experiment without knowing the variables that we are experimenting with. Right? Next is the tips for success with experiment at home. No? So, since we are doing things on our own, we need to consider certain aspects of the experiment so that we will have the right results in your experiment. So, tip number 1 is to have the materials on hand. No? Make sure that the prescribed equipment, prescribed materials are available on the day of the experiment. So check or create, you can create a checklist whether all your raw materials and equipment are available, because when you start the experiment, it would be hard to immediately get something if uh, especially if the material must be ordered outside, right? It would be time consuming to wait for the materials to arrive, no? Because you are already performing the experiment. No? So this is number 1. Make sure that all materials are ready. Right? Next is tip number 2, to read ahead. No? Do not just immediately proceed with experimentation. The first thing that you must do is to read first the entire experiment procedure. No? So that you will know the materials that you need to prepare, the 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 step-by-step procedure, and all other content of the experiment that you would be doing. right? And with that, you would also be able to imagine what the steps you would be following and be able to prepare your mind ahead before doing the experiment. Tip number 3, follow the directions, right? Make sure that all the step-by-step procedures in the manual is followed. No? That is the reason why you have to read them first and not uh, the other way around. While you are doing, you are reading the procedure, no? Because it would be very difficult to focus on doing two things at the same time, no? So read first, and then read first all the procedures before doing them, so that you are already familiar with what to do next. All right? And this is one way also to avoid misconceptions or misinterpretations when doing the experiment, right? And sometimes there are words that may be unclear to you in the direction. So what you have to do is to clarify it with your science teacher if you seem to be lost with your procedure, or when you think that a procedure is vague for you or it's difficult to understand for you, you have to ask for help, no, before doing the experiments actually, right? Next is tip number 4. Some days are like that, even in Australia. What does it mean? It means that not all the time your experiments will be successful, right? There are times that you will follow all of the procedures correctly. You will use the exact measurements, but at the end of the experiment, the result is different from what is expected. No? What are you going to do with that? No? You have to accept that. Ano? Take note of the result, but make sure to review your procedure. And if you have recorded yourself doing the experiment, look back at your recording and watch the steps that you did. And maybe along the way, you have miscalculated, or you have skipped one procedure, or you did the procedure differently from what is prescribed in the manual. So if that happens, don't be frustrated. We can do the experiment once more, no? Wala namang masama kung ulitin natin, no? It's all right. Right. And tip number 5, if at first you don't succeed, try again. No? This is what I have been telling earlier. If there are times that you failed with the experiment, don't think that it is a failure. No? Think of it as a lesson. And a lesson learned will be a good experience for you to improve and to become better in doing experiments at home. No? Don't be sad if the results are not what you expect to have. And what you can do is to, again, retry the experiment, talk with your science teacher, and tell them what happened with your experiment so that they could guide you better. And maybe you will have a better result then. Right? And finally, to end my presentation, let me end with this quotation from Arthur Other of their Hyde. All knowledge is connected to all other knowledge. The fun is in making the connection. So have fun doing your DIY experiments at home, and let's learn science even though we are not physically connected with one another. But our minds and our heart are very much connected. Thank you very much once again, and have a safe day.